Captain Quillen leaned back in his seat, staring at the cockpit's display like it had insulted his mother. "Okay, folks, we're nearing Ganymede. You know the drill. Try not to get yourselves killed while I try to remember why the hell we signed up for this job." His voice crackled through the intercom, echoing down the cramped corridors of the Aurora, bouncing off the metal walls and settling in the ears of a crew that looked like they'd lost a bar fight to a gang of feral accountants. First Officer Lyra, who seemed to have been born with sarcasm etched into her DNA, smirked from her console. "Maybe we were drunk when we signed the contract, sir. That's the only explanation I can think of." Quillen tapped a finger against the armrest, the gesture more of a nervous tic than any real attempt at authority. "Drunk on ambition, Lyra. Or the promise of money, though the two aren't mutually exclusive." "Speaking of money," chimed in Grigori, the engineer with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, including in a bathtub full of electric eels. "When do we get paid for this gig? I'm running low on bribe money for the local authorities." "You'll get your cut after we grab whatever the hell it is we're supposed to find in those ruins," Quillen replied, his voice slipping into the realm of "I have no idea what I'm doing." The Aurora shuddered slightly as it entered Ganymede's orbit, the artificial gravity fighting to keep everything upright while the universe did its best to turn them into a pancake. Ganymede loomed outside the viewport, a great icy ball that looked like it could use a vacation somewhere warmer. Quillen threw a glance at the planet, his eyes narrowing like it owed him money. "All right, you miserable lot, time to make a name for yourselves. Or at least not die in the process." "I hear not dying is all the rage these days," Lyra noted, her fingers dancing over the console, preparing the landing procedures with a grace that belied the chaotic nature of their surroundings. Grigori snorted, checking the engine readouts. "Yeah, but it's not as fun as you think." The Aurora descended, the landscape below a patchwork of ice and rock, crisscrossed by veins of something that looked suspiciously like it glowed in the dark. As the landing gear extended with a groan that suggested it might not retract ever again, Quillen couldn't help but marvel at how humanity's best technology often sounded like it was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Touchdown," Lyra announced, sarcasm wrapped around her words like a thick winter coat. "Congratulations, we've managed to land without exploding. I'm as shocked as you are," Quillen said, unbuckling his harness and standing with the air of a man about to face a firing squad. "Time to see what the last civilization left us." The crew disembarked, stepping onto the crunchy surface of Ganymede, their breath fogging in the already frosty air. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that suggested something was lurking just out of sight, probably sharpening its claws and planning how best to eat them. "This place feels welcoming," Grigori muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Lyra adjusted her visor, scanning the horizon. "If by welcoming you mean terrifyingly empty, then yes, it's lovely." Before them lay the ruins, dark and foreboding, carved into the landscape like the remnants of a civilization that had a flair for the dramatic. The entrance was a gaping maw, shadows spilling out like secrets from a politician's diary. Quillen took a deep breath, the chill air biting into his lungs. "All right, people, let's find this artifact and get the hell out of here before something decides we'd make a nice aperitif." They moved forward, each step crunching against the icy ground, their suits making them look like misplaced astronauts at a particularly grim costume party. "Why do I feel like we're being watched?" Lyra asked, her voice low, though the sarcasm hadn't left her tone. "Because you're paranoid," Grigori replied, his eyes flicking around, just in case she wasn't entirely wrong. "Or maybe it's because this place is a goddamn labyrinth," Quillen interrupted, pointing ahead to where the ruins seemed to twist and turn like some demented architect's fever dream. "Someone went through a lot of trouble to make sure nobody gets in here without a map, and a very good reason." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "And we have neither," the captain shrugged. "Never stopped us before." They ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the walls towering above them like the world's most unwelcoming hedge maze. Symbols adorned the stone, etched in a language long forgotten, their meaning as lost as last week's car keys. "These markings," Lyra mused, running a gloved hand over one of the symbols. "Think they say abandon all hope, ye who enter here." "If we're lucky," Grigori responded, his eyes glued to his scanner which was stubbornly refusing to cooperate. "Otherwise it says danger, falling rocks and existential dread." The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became, as if the ruins themselves were leaning in, listening to their every breath. The place felt alive, in the way a bear trap feels alive right before it snaps shut. "Anyone else feel like we're walking into a bad horror movie?" Lyra asked, her humor a thin veneer over genuine concern. "Just keep an eye out for angry ghosts," Quillen replied. "Or worse, lawyers." As they continued, the corridors narrowed, the walls closing in as if to whisper secrets better left unheard. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, casting strange shadows that danced like marionettes with broken strings. Eventually, the path opened into a chamber, vast and echoing, its ceiling lost in darkness. At its center stood a pedestal, and atop it sat an object that glowed with a soft, inviting light, like the universe's least practical nightlight. "There it is," Quillen announced, his voice tinged with relief and disbelief. "The artifact," Grigori frowned, crossing his arms. "Looks like a glorified paperweight, or a very expensive doorstop," Lyra suggested. Quillen approached it cautiously, as if expecting it to grow legs and scamper off. "Let's just grab it," and a rumble interrupted him, the floor vibrating like it had had too much caffeine. The walls groaned, stone grinding against stone, as if the ruins were waking up after a long nap. "A cap," Lyra said, her voice suddenly devoid of humor. "Yeah, I noticed," Quillen replied, his eyes wide as he snatched the artifact. Time to run. The crew bolted, the chamber collapsing behind them in a cacophony of destruction. Dust filled the air as they sprinted through the labyrinth, the path they had painstakingly memorized now their only hope of avoiding a tomb of rubble. "I knew this was a trap," Grigori shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Really? What gave it away? The ominous shadows or the fact that everything's trying to kill us?" Lyra snapped back, her feet pounding against the ground. They burst back into the open air, the ruins crumbling behind them like a bad memory. Quillen clutched the artifact, its glow now a mocking reminder of their near miss with mortality. "Well, that was fun," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. Lyra doubled over, hands on her knees, laughing despite herself. "Next time, let's just stick to exploring abandoned malls, huh?" Grigori wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his lips curling into a grin despite the danger they just escaped. "So, who wants to go back in for round 2? Quillen shook his head, staring at the artifact. "Let's just get back to the Aurora and figure out what this thing does before it decides to finish the job." As they made their way back to the ship, the wind picked up, swirling around them with a chill that spoke of frozen secrets and ancient whispers. Behind them, the ruins stood silent once more, their secrets buried beneath the ice. The crew climbed back aboard the Aurora, the ship welcoming them with its familiar hum, as if it were as glad to see them alive as they were to still be breathing. "All right," Quillen said as they settled into their seats, the artifact securely stowed away. "Let's find out what this thing is before it tries to kill us again." Lyra glanced at the captain, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "You know, for a mission that started out as a simple artifact retrieval, this really took a turn for the worse." Grigori chuckled, checking the systems to ensure their hasty retreat hadn't done any damage. "I think we just set a new standard for worst day on the job." Quillen grinned, despite the madness of the situation. "At least we got a story out of it. And a suspiciously glowing artifact that might explode," Lyra added helpfully. "Let's focus on the positives," Quillen replied, settling into the captain's chair. "Like the fact that we're not dead." With that, the Aurora lifted off, leaving the ruins of Ganymede behind, a mystery wrapped in enigmas they'd only begun to unravel. The stars lay ahead, promising new adventures, new dangers, and hopefully fewer collapsing ruins. As they broke free of Ganymede's gravity, Quillen couldn't help but glance back at the rapidly shrinking moon. Humanity had a tendency to poke its nose where it didn't belong, and this time had been no exception. But for now, they'd survived another day, and that was enough. Lyra leaned over, a twinkle in her eye. "So, Captain, what's next on our agenda?" Quillen grinned, his eyes fixed on the stars. "Finding out if this thing's worth the trouble, and maybe getting a drink or three." The crew laughed, their voices mingling with the hum of the aurora as it sailed through the cosmos, a small bastion of humanity against the vast, uncaring void. And despite the danger, the uncertainty, and the near-death experiences, they wouldn't have it any other way. The Aurora's interior was buzzing with the usual symphony of malfunction warnings and the occasional ominous creak, the kind you'd expect from a ship that had seen one too many adventures. Captain Quillen eased into his seat, eyeing the artifact they'd just risked their necks for. It glowed with a soft, otherworldly light, like a radioactive marshmallow. "Anyone else wondering if this thing's our ticket to early retirement or an express pass to a particularly messy funeral?" Quillen asked, dry as a desert. Lyra snorted, reclining in her chair with a grace that suggested she was more at home here than anywhere else. "I don't know, Captain. If it does explode, at least it'll save us from the horror of unpaid bills." Grigori, their resident engineer, was hunched over a control panel, his fingers dancing over switches with the precision of a cat burglar. "Or it could just be a fancy light show," he added, barely looking up. "But knowing our luck, it'll turn out to be an ancient toaster with genocidal tendencies." Quillen laughed, more out of habit than humor. "You always know how to lift the mood, Grigori." "That's what I'm paid for," Grigori replied, though his tone suggested he hadn't seen a single credit for his efforts in a long time. The artifact sat there, silent and unmoving, which was more than could be said for the rest of the crew. Lyra was running diagnostics, her brow furrowed in concentration. Grigori muttered to himself, the universal language of engineers everywhere, as he tried to coax more life out of the Aurora's systems. "So, what do we know about this thing?" Quillen asked, nodding toward the artifact. "Aside from the fact that it nearly killed us getting it." Lyra rolled her eyes, tapping away at her console. "According to this, it's emitting some kind of signal. Could be anything from a welcome mat to a distress call. Or an order for pizza," Grigori chimed in. "Oh, wait, it's coming from a defunct civilization. Never mind." Quillen leaned back, thoughtful. "What kind of signal are we talking about?" "Well," Lyra said, drawing out the word like it was a particularly difficult game of charades, "it's got a wavelength that suggests it's capable of interfacing with other technology. Like controlling it." Silence fell, punctuated only by the hum of the ship and the occasional ominous beep from Grigori's console. "So you're saying it can tell machines what to do?" Quillen clarified, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "That's one possibility," Lyra admitted. "Or it could be a very elaborate paperweight, as Grigori so eloquently put it." Grigori clicked his tongue. "Knowing our luck, it'll probably end up unleashing a fleet of homicidal robots." "Hey, look on the bright side," Lyra said, a smirk playing on her lips. "At least we die with a story worth telling." Quillen rubbed his temples. "Let's just hope it doesn't decide to turn the Aurora into a sentient nightmare. I like my ship just the way it is, barely functional and constantly on the edge of breakdown." Grigori chuckled, crossing his arms. "Just like the rest of us, then." The banter was cut short as the ship's alarm blared to life, filling the cockpit with red light and a sound that could only be described as a cat being strangled by a bagpipe. "What's happening?" Quillen barked, his attention snapping to the flashing console. "Looks like the artifact is waking up something in the ruins," Lyra reported, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I'm picking up movement, lots of it." Grigori's face twisted into a grimace. "Ah hell, I knew it was too quiet." The ship shook as something massive slammed into it, sending them all sprawling. Quillen gripped his chair, trying to steady himself. Status report. Automated defenses, Cap. Lyra shouted over the noise, her voice tinged with alarm. Looks like some ancient security system's been reactivated. Perfect, Quillen muttered, punching the controls. First ghosts, now killer robots. Those aren't the kind of party guests I invited, Grigori added, his humor doing little to mask the tension in his voice. Quillen scanned the readouts. Lyra, get us some distance. Grigori, see if you can shut those things down. I don't feel like explaining to Command how we got the ship turned into a metal pancake. Lyra was already working on it, her hands a blur on the controls. I'm trying. These things don't take no for an answer, Grigori grunted, diving into the mess of wires and circuits that was his domain. Give me a second. If this artifact controls machines, maybe I can use it to tell those defenses to sod off. Quillen nodded, though he knew better than to get his hopes up. Do it, and quickly. The ship lurched again, another blast rattling their bones. Lyra swore under her breath, her focus never wavering. Those defenses are getting closer, Captain. Either they're really keen on our company or they're programmed to be overly aggressive hosts. Quillen's fingers tapped a rhythm of impatience on his armrest. Grigori, any luck? Working on it, Grigori snapped, the rare hint of desperation in his voice. If I can just align this. The artifact pulsed suddenly, a wave of energy rippling through the ship. It was as if the thing had decided now was the perfect time to flex its muscles. The assault eased off, the relentless barrage slowing to a hesitant trickle. Quillen's eyes widened. What's happening? Grigori's expression was a mix of triumph and disbelief. It's working. The artifact's sending out a signal that's confusing their systems. Lyra grinned, the relief palpable. Nice work. Let's hope your magic touch keeps them at bay. Quillen allowed himself a breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Let's not hang around to find out if it was just a temporary glitch. Get us out of here, Lyra. Lyra nodded, guiding the Aurora away from the ruins with a deft touch. On it. We're not out of the woods yet, but at least those defenses seem to be taking a nap. Grigori sank back, wiping sweat from his brow. Remind me never to question the power of ancient tech again. Quillen chuckled, though his eyes remained watchful. Let's just focus on getting home in one piece. And figuring out what this artifact wants with us. The Aurora slipped through the inky blackness of space, leaving Ganymede and its secrets behind. But as the stars stretched out before them, Quillen couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. Ancient tech, hostile defenses, and a mysterious artifact that was more than it seemed. Just another day in the life of a spacefarer. And so they sailed on, a motley crew bound for adventure, danger, and a few more laughs along the way. As the Aurora cruised away from Ganymede, the ship's comms crackled to life with a noise that sounded suspiciously like a cat hacking up a hairball. Quillen's face scrunched up as he tapped the console with a mix of irritation and curiosity. Please tell me that's not another ancient toaster reaching out for a friendly chit-chat, he grumbled, casting a wary glance at Lyra, who was already working her magic on the controls. Afraid not, Captain, Lyra replied, her voice laced with a mischievous undertone. Looks like someone else wants to join our little party. Grigori, hunched over the artifact as though it were a particularly stubborn puzzle, glanced up with an arched eyebrow. We inviting new friends. Hope they bring drinks. We're almost out. Quillen rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. Will you listen to this guy? Always got his priorities straight. The comms crackled again, this time with more clarity. A voice, smooth and cold as a killer's grin, filled the cockpit. Aurora, this is the Mechanist. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Lyra shot Quillen a sideways look. Oh, great. Another egomaniac with a title. Just what we needed. Quillen leaned forward, pulling up the visual on the screen. The figure that appeared was everything one would expect from someone who called themselves the Mechanist. All slick lines, metallic limbs, and an air of superiority that could choke a horse. Do I want to know what this thing is, Mechanist? Quillen asked, keeping his tone deliberately casual. Or should I just throw it into the nearest sun and save us both a lot of trouble? The mechanist's lips curled into a thin smile, lacking any warmth. I wouldn't recommend that. It's worth more than your entire ship. Possibly your lives too, you sure? I mean, lately, our lives have been auctioned off for peanuts, Grigori chimed in, not even bothering to look up. Quillen waved a dismissive hand. Sorry, but we're a bit attached to it after all we went through. Unless you've got a hell of a pitch, I'm not inclined to part with it. The mechanist's eyes narrowed, looking through the screen like they were boring a hole in Quillen's skull. The artifact is a key. It unlocks technology left by the ancient civilization of Ganymede. Technology that can reshape worlds. Reshape worlds. Sounds like a sales pitch for a really aggressive landscaping service, Lear equipped, earning a chuckle from Grigori. Quillen scratched his chin. And let me guess, you're planning to use it for the greater good of the universe, right? Something like that, the mechanist replied, though the smoothness of the response did little to inspire trust. Yeah, I'm not buying it, Quillen said, crossing his arms. We've got enough people trying to reshape us already, thanks. The mechanist's expression hardened, the smile disappearing like it had never been there. You're playing a dangerous game, Captain. I have resources at my disposal that you can't even begin to imagine. Resources. Please, we can barely imagine lunch tomorrow, Grigori muttered as he fiddled with a circuit. Quillen leaned in, a grin on his face that could melt iron. You're welcome to try and take it from us. But fair warning, we're a stubborn lot. And I don't like being told what to do by someone who thinks leather and metal make a wardrobe. I'll give you some time to reconsider, the mechanist said, the threat implicit. But not too much. I'm not known for my patience. With that, the connection cut, leaving the Aurora's crew in a silence that was almost loud enough to hear. So, what's the plan? Lyra asked, her voice the first to break the uneasy quiet. Quillen shrugged as though he were merely asked to choose between coffee or tea. We buy time. Figure out what this thing can do and how it can work for us. And maybe, just maybe, we use it to give the mechanist the middle finger. Sounds like a plan, Grigori said, rubbing his hands together. I'll get started on seeing if we can use it to our advantage. Lyra, keep us moving. I don't want to be sitting ducks if the mechanist decides patience is overrated, Quillen instructed, already thinking 3 steps ahead. On it, Captain. Our little metal friend isn't gonna find us standing still, Lyra said, fingers a blur on the controls. The Aurora picked up speed, the stars stretching out like lines of cocaine in the void. Behind them, Ganymede was just a memory. Ahead, the vastness was both promise and threat. As they sailed through the darkness, the crew fell into a rhythm, the hum of the ship a familiar lullaby. Grigori was knee-deep in tech, muttering to himself as he worked. Lyra kept them moving, her mind sharp and clear. Quillen watched over them all, the weight of leadership a constant companion. Think the mechanist's gonna come knocking soon? Lyra asked, glancing at Quillen over her shoulder. He'll come, Quillen replied, voice steady. Men like him always do. They don't take no for an answer, and when he does. Grigori's question hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. We show him what happens when you push a crew that's got nothing left to lose, Quillen said, a hard edge to his words. Time passed in the way it does in space, slow and fast all at once, stretching out like a yawn and snapping shut like a book. Quillen found himself in the mess, staring into a mug of something that might once have been coffee but was now just a dark mirror reflecting back a weary face. Lyra joined him, sliding into the seat opposite. Penny for your thoughts, Captain. No thoughts, just caffeine-induced hallucinations, Quillen replied with a wry smile. You, wondering how long we can play cat and mouse with the mechanist before our luck runs out, Lyra admitted, her tone light but her eyes serious. Long enough to figure out what our shiny new toy does, hopefully, Quillen said, tapping the side of his mug. Grigori's making progress. He's grumbling more than usual, which is either a good sign or a very bad one, Lyra said, leaning back. Quillen chuckled. With Grigori, it's hard to tell the difference. Captain Lyra, you might want to come see this. Grigori's voice crackled over the intercom, pulling them from their momentary respite. They found him still hunched over the artifact, surrounded by a chaotic array of tools and half-eaten snacks. "What's up?" Quillen asked, peering over Grigori's shoulder. "I managed to patch into the artifact's signal, and guess what?" Grigori said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "It's got a map, a map." Lyra echoed, leaning in with interest. "Yeah, a map," Grigori confirmed, tapping at the screen with a grease-stained finger. "To something buried deep in Ganymede. Something big, bigger than the ruins?" Quillen asked, intrigued despite himself. "Big enough that even the mechanist hasn't gotten his mechanical mitts on it yet," Grigori said, his grin widening. "I think it's the source of all the tech on Ganymede." Quillen exchanged a look with Lyra, one that was equal parts excitement and trepidation. "So if we get there first, we might just have the upper hand," Lyra finished, her voice brimming with possibility. Quillen nodded, his mind racing with plans and potential pitfalls. "All right, let's see if we can beat the mechanist at his own game." As plans went, it was half-baked at best, but that was par for the course on the Aurora. They'd make it up as they went along, as they always did. Because when you're constantly inches from disaster, you learn to improvise. The journey back to Ganymede was tense, the looming threat of the mechanist a dark cloud on the horizon. They moved with caution, using every trick they knew to avoid detection. Lyra's voice broke through the tension as they approached the moon once more, her tone dry. "Back to the scene of the crime. Let's hope no one's put out a warrant for our arrest." Quillen watched the landscape of Ganymede unfold before them, familiar and foreboding. "We weren't here long enough to make any friends," he mused. "And that's probably for the best." Grigori was already making preparations, his confidence in the tech palpable. "I've synced the map with our systems. Should give us a heads up on any nasty surprises." "Let's hope it works," Quillen said, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his optimism. They landed under the cover of darkness, the ship a silent sentinel on the surface. The air was tense with possibility and unspoken fears. Lyra, ever the pragmatist, summed it up with her usual flair. "Here's hoping we don't wake up any more homicidal toasters, or worse," Grigori added, though his focus was on the task at hand. They moved cautiously, following the artifact's guidance through the labyrinthine ruins. The place was a tomb, echoing with the ghosts of a civilization long gone. Their footsteps were the only sound, a reminder of their solitude. Quillen kept his thoughts to himself, eyes scanning the shadows for threats. He knew the risks they were taking, knew that one misstep could cost them dearly. But he also knew they couldn't turn back, not now. "This is it," Grigori announced, stopping before a massive structure that loomed out of the darkness like a sleeping giant. "What's inside?" Lyra asked, though the question was rhetorical. "Only one way to find out," Quillen replied, his voice steady and sure. They entered, the air thick with anticipation. The artifact pulsed with a strange energy, as if alive and aware of its surroundings. It led them deeper into the heart of the structure. And then they saw it, a machine unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It was beautiful and terrible, a relic of a past that defied understanding. "Is this it?" Lyra breathed, awe in her voice. "This is it," Grigori confirmed, eyes wide with wonder. Quillen looked at his crew, a strange mix of pride and uncertainty welling up inside him. They'd come this far, braving threats and unknown dangers. But the hardest part was yet to come. "Now what?" Lyra asked, her voice bringing him back to the present. "Now we make it work for us," Quillen said, determination in his eyes. "And hope the mechanist doesn't catch up before we figure out how." The mechanist was still out there, lurking in the shadows, a threat that would not be easily dismissed. But with this new find they had a chance, a slim one but better than none at all, to outsmart him. As they worked, the weight of their task settled over them, but so did a sense of camaraderie, of shared purpose. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out on top. In the quiet of the ancient structure, surrounded by the mysteries of a long-lost civilization, the crew of the Aurora prepared for the fight of their lives. Grigori was still grinning like a kid who'd found a stash of contraband candy as he stared at the ancient machine before them. Quillen, however, wasn't quite ready to break out the champagne. Because if there was one unwritten rule of the universe, it was that when things seemed too good to be true, they usually came with a hefty price tag. And sometimes that price was your soul. Or worse, your ship's fuel reserves. "Grigori, you sure this thing isn't going to explode and take half of Ganymede with it?" Quillen asked, eyeing the relic with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for politicians and used starship salesmen. Grigori shrugged, which was about as reassuring as a leaky spacesuit. "No guarantees, Captain, but hey, worst case, we go out in a blaze of glory. Who doesn't want a death that makes headlines?" Lyra snorted, the sound echoing off the ancient walls. "Yeah, I've always wanted my epitaph to read 'Here lies Lyra,' went out with a bang because Grigori couldn't resist poking the shiny thing." Quillen rubbed his temples. He could feel the pressure building, a headache forming as persistent as tax collectors. "We're not here to make headlines, we're here to survive. So let's figure out how to make this thing useful without attracting the mechanist's attention, or blowing ourselves up." The artifact pulsed with an eerie glow, its light spilling across the chamber like the world's most ominous disco ball. Grigori was in his element, fiddling with controls and mumbling to himself like a mad scientist conducting a particularly tricky experiment. "All right," he said, finally looking up. "There's data here, old stuff, maps, logs, stories. It's like someone dumped the digital equivalent of a bedtime story collection in here." "Bedtime stories, huh?" Lyra leaned over to peek at the screen. "Maybe they can tell us a tale about how not to get killed by angry cyborgs." Quillen suppressed a chuckle. "All right, bedtime stories it is. Let's see if they can help us navigate this mess." The chamber was silent save for the hum of the machine and the occasional crackle from Grigori's attempts at digital archaeology. The crew gathered around, the glow reflecting off their faces as they delved into the past, hoping it would light a way to a future that didn't involve becoming scrap metal. "Here's something," Grigori announced, pointing at a sequence of symbols that danced across the screen like tipsy fireflies. "I think it's a story of what happened here. Might give us a clue about what we're dealing with." "Let's hear it," Quillen said, leaning in. Grigori began reading, his voice pitched low and conspiratorial. The tale unfolded like a grim fairy tale, detailing the rise and fall of a civilization that had reached too far and paid the price. Their thirst for technological advancement had led them to create wonders and horrors beyond imagination. But as with all good stories, it ended in disaster, wars, destruction, the kind of ending that left you questioning the point of it all. "Well," Lyra said, her voice dry as a Martian desert, "that's cheery. Makes me nostalgic for our own dysfunctional planet." "There's more," Grigori said, scrolling through the data. "Mentions of a labyrinth, a system they built to protect what's left. It's supposed to lead to the heart of their tech." Quillen frowned, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "And let me guess, we're smack in the middle of that labyrinth right now." "Bingo," Grigori confirmed, tapping the screen. "And it looks like every twist and turn is designed to keep people out or lead them to a very bad end." "Fantastic," Lyra drawled. "So we're on a treasure hunt with dire consequences for wrong turns." "Remind me to fire our travel agent." The room was silent for a moment, the air thick with the weight of their predicament. They were trapped in a maze, pursued by the mechanist, and guided only by the ghostly echoes of a lost people's tales. Quillen sighed, the sound heavy in the quiet. "All right, let's use these stories to guide us. Maybe the way out is hidden in their words." They set to work, piecing together the fragments of the past like archaeologists reconstructing a shattered vase. Each clue was a thread, weaving a tapestry that could either be a map or a noose. But they had no choice, they had to follow it. As they worked, Quillen couldn't help but marvel at the ingenuity of the people who had built this place, and the stupidity that had led to their downfall. A familiar story, really. Humans had a knack for repeating history, like stubborn children who refused to learn from past mistakes. "Here's something," Lyra said suddenly, her finger tracing a line of text. "It talks about a key. Something that can unlock the path forward." "A key?" Quillen echoed, intrigued. What kind of key? Not sure, Lyra admitted. But it's linked to the artifact, something only it can activate. Grigori scratched his head, the picture of a man deep in thought or possible indigestion. So we have a key but no lock. A puzzle with missing pieces. In other words, business as usual, Quillen quipped, a wry smile playing at his lips. All right, let's find this lock. We've got a key and nothing left to lose. Guided by the cryptic instructions, they retraced their steps, navigating the labyrinth with the cautious optimism of gamblers on a losing streak. The walls seemed to close in around them, the air growing heavy with the weight of ages and secrets. As they moved, Quillen found his mind wandering. He thought of their mission, of the promises made and the debts that would soon come due. He thought of the mechanist, the metallic tyrant who was undoubtedly closing in. And he thought of his crew, the ragtag band of misfits who had somehow become his family. Think we're close? Lyra asked, breaking the silence. Either close or hopelessly lost, Grigori replied, ever the optimist. Quillen shot them both a look. Let's focus. If there's a lock, we'll find it. And if not, well, at least we'll have a hell of a story to tell before we're vaporized. The path led them deeper, the walls closing in like a predator's jaws. But just as doubt began to gnaw at their resolve, they stumbled upon it, the lock. It was unassuming, a simple console set into the wall, but the aura it projected was anything but ordinary. The artifact in Grigori's hands pulsed in response, its glow intensifying as if recognizing an old friend. Here we go, Grigori said, voice tinged with excitement and apprehension. He approached the console, the artifact humming with energy. With a deft twist, he slotted it into place. There was a pause, a heartbeat of silence that stretched on, testing their patience and fraying their nerves. And then, like a slumbering beast stirred from its rest, the mechanism came to life. The walls shuddered, a low rumble resonating through the chamber as ancient gears turned and ancient systems powered up. Well, that's either really good or really bad, Lyra remarked, her tone lighter than her expression. Quillen nodded, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Let's hope it's the former. I'd rather end today with all my limbs intact. The labyrinth began to shift, the walls reconfiguring in a slow, deliberate dance. Pathways opened up, revealing new routes and possibilities. The maze was changing, guided by the artifact they held. Looks like we have our way forward, Grigori said, a note of triumph in his voice. See, Quillen said, his tone light with forced optimism. All we needed was a bedtime story and a little faith. We've got the stories, Lyra said. Now let's hope that faith doesn't get us killed. Together they pressed on, the artifact illuminating their way like a beacon in the dark. Each step was a victory, each turn a triumph against the odds that sought to bury them. As they moved, Quillen felt a renewed sense of purpose. They'd faced danger and uncertainty, but they'd done it together. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. But the specter of the mechanist loomed large, a reminder that their journey was far from over. The fight was coming, and it would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. And yet, with the labyrinth behind them and the path ahead clear, Quillen felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in too long: hope. He glanced at his crew, saw the determination in their eyes, and knew they would face whatever came next as one. Because they were the crew of the Aurora, and they'd never backed down from a challenge yet. As they stepped into the unknown, the echoes of ancient stories guiding their way, Quillen allowed himself a small, defiant smile. Let's go show the mechanist what happens when you mess with the wrong damn crew. The hum of the artifact was a distant memory as the crew of the Aurora trudged through the labyrinth, dragging their hopes behind them like a sagging tail of an asteroid-bound comet. They might have found a way forward, but that didn't stop the universe from flipping them the cosmic bird at every turn. The walls seemed to close in around them like the universe was playing a particularly cruel joke, and they were the punchline. Great, Lyra muttered, swiping sweat from her brow. From treasure hunt to rat maze. Remind me again why we signed up for this glamorous lifestyle. Because we're masochists with a penchant for financial ruin, Quillen replied, his voice laced with dry humor. Or at least that's what the recruitment poster promised. Grigori, ever the optimist, or maybe just blissfully ignorant, slapped a hand against the wall as if expecting it to give him directions. "Come on, walls, tell us your secrets. We're all ears." The wall, unsurprisingly, remained silent. "Maybe it's shy," Lyra quipped, peering down yet another endless corridor. "Or maybe it just hates us," Quillen sighed, checking the dwindling power on the readouts. They were running low on just about everything: oxygen, food, patience. If this thing doesn't pan out soon, we might have to start eating the stories instead of reading them. "Hey, I've heard worse diets," Grigori said, grinning. "You'd be amazed at the nutritional value of ancient digital data." "Yeah." "How's it taste?" Lyra folded her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Like regret and missed opportunities," Grigori said with a smirk, with a side of existential dread. They hit a dead end, the corridor coming to an abrupt halt with a wall that might as well have had a sign saying, "Hope you weren't expecting an exit." Quillen punched the wall, more for effect than any real hope of moving it. "We're trapped in a labyrinth built by a civilization that couldn't find its way out of a paper bag. Fantastic." Lyra leaned against the unforgiving stone, closing her eyes. "Well, at least if we die here, we'll have a snazzy epitaph, lost in translation and in general." "Optimism isn't your strong suit, is it?" Quillen said, giving her a sideways glance. "I'm plenty optimistic," Lyra shot back. "I'm optimistic that we'll find a way to screw this up even more." Grigori, ever the cheerful buffer between their biting banter, shrugged. "Look on the bright side. At least the mechanist hasn't found us yet. I'd rather be lost than found by that scrap heap." "Small comforts," Quillen muttered, shaking his head. "Now let's see what these bedtime stories really have for us." "We need something, anything to keep us moving." They settled into a weary silence, the only sound the occasional shuffle of boots against stone. Grigori dove back into the ancient data, fingers dancing over the controls, pausing only to sigh dramatically when the machine fed him yet another string of incomprehensible symbols. "This one reads like a cult manual," Grigori said finally, his tone a mix of curiosity and incredulity. "They believed they could transcend their mortal forms through technology. Surprise, surprise, it didn't go as planned." "Wow, you mean merging flesh with machine didn't result in eternal bliss?" "Shocking," Lyra said, unable to keep the sarcasm at bay. "Who could have seen that coming?" "The cult's downfall," Grigori continued, "came when they tried to build a machine to download themselves into. Let's just say the beta test had a few bugs." Quillen chuckled darkly. "I'll bet. Did they at least get tech support?" "Oh, they got support all right," Grigori grinned. "In the form of catastrophic failure and a one-way ticket to oblivion." Lyra scoffed. "Typical." "Bet they didn't even get a refund." As they sifted through the digital debris of a lost civilization, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching a cosmic rerun. Ambition leading to downfall, dreams dashed against the cold, hard rocks of reality. It was a tale as old as time, yet here they were, stuck in the same damned loop. "We're not much different, are we?" Quillen mused aloud, glancing at his crew. "Chasing after scraps of glory in the void, hoping not to end up as cautionary tales." Lyra shrugged. "At least we're consistent. Humans, the galaxy's biggest repeat offenders." Grigori perked up, tapping excitedly at the controls. "Wait, there's something here. A story about a hidden chamber, a place of enlightenment, or more likely, their version of a panic room." "A panic room sounds about right for us right now," Lyra said with a thin smile. "Lead the way, Grigori. Maybe they left us a parting gift." The labyrinth seemed to shift around them as they followed Grigori's lead, each twist and turn a reminder of how far they'd come, and how far they still had to go. The walls grew tighter, the air thicker, until it felt like they were moving through molasses. "Feels like we've been walking for an eternity," Lyra grumbled, her voice echoing off the walls. "Would you prefer a brisk jog?" Quillen shot back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Only if it's toward the exit," Lyra replied, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of an end. Finally, after what felt like an arduous journey into the heart of absurdity, they reached a chamber that was different from the others. It was larger, more open, and at its center stood a pedestal upon which rested nothing. "Well, that's anticlimactic," Lyra said, disappointment dripping from her words. "Where's the enlightenment, the answers, the buffet?" Grigori stared at the empty pedestal, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's something here, an energy signature, faint but present." Quillen nodded, feeling the familiar stirrings of hope or maybe desperation. Hard to tell the difference these days. "Let's see what our ghostly hosts have left us." Grigori approached the pedestal, his movements slow and deliberate, as if expecting the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He placed the artifact, their fickle companion, down gently. It pulsed once, then went dark. "That's it?" Lyra asked, sounding more annoyed than surprised. "We came all this way for a light show that didn't even show up." Grigori tapped the pedestal, his frustration mirrored in his expression. "It's supposed to do something. The stories talked about a key, a pivotal moment where everything aligns. Maybe it's just waiting for the right cue," Quillen said, refusing to let the failure of a light bulb dim his resolve. "If we've learned anything, it's that patience is a virtue, an annoying, frustrating virtue." As they deliberated, a strange hum began to echo through the chamber, resonating through the walls like a whisper from the past. It grew in intensity, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate in their bones. "Okay, that's new," Lyra said, looking around. "Is this what success feels like? Because it's a bit underwhelming." Grigori's eyes widened with realization. "The artifact, it's reacting to something. We might have triggered a failsafe, or maybe it's about to explode and take us with it," Lyra finished, her tone only half joking. Quillen stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the artifact. "Whatever it is, we need to be ready. If this is our opportunity, we can't afford to blink." The hum intensified, a crescendo of sound that threatened to drown out thoughts, fears, doubts. And then, with a shudder that rattled the floor beneath them, the pedestal began to glow, softly at first, then with a brilliant light that filled the chamber. "Well, that's more like it," Grigori said, shielding his eyes. "Let's just hope it's not a prelude to annihilation." The light coalesced into shapes, patterns swirling and shifting in the air above the pedestal. It was a map, no, a guide. A path leading through the labyrinth, showing them the way out. "Looks like we got our parting gift after all," Quillen said, a grin breaking through his stoic facade. Lyra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Finally, some good news." "Let's move," Quillen ordered, his voice firm with renewed determination, "before the mechanist decides to crash our victory party." With the way forward illuminated, they followed the radiant map, each step a reminder that they weren't beaten yet. They'd stumbled, nearly fallen, but they'd gotten back up again and again. Like the stubborn, relentless fools they were. As they hurried down the corridors, the path twisting and turning in a dance of light and shadow, Quillen allowed himself a moment of reflection. They were close, so close. And while success wasn't guaranteed, the promise of it was enough to keep them going. The walls seemed to part like curtains, the way opening up as if inviting them to escape. They moved quickly, the echoes of the past falling away, replaced by the promise of a future not yet written. They could almost taste freedom, it was so near. "How are we doing on time?" Lyra called over her shoulder, casting a wary glance back down the path. Quillen glanced at his wrist readout, the numbers ticking down like a doomsday clock. "Not great, but I've seen worse." "High praise," Lyra said dryly, focusing on the path ahead. "Let's just hope the mechanist doesn't have a surprise waiting for us at the door." As they neared the exit, the hum of the artifact began to fade, the light map flickering like a candle in the wind. But it didn't matter. They'd made it this far, and they were damn well going to see it through. They burst through the final door, the labyrinth finally releasing them from its clutches. The sky was dark, stars twinkling overhead like distant beacons. It wasn't home, but it was a start. Quillen turned to face his crew, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Congratulations, team. We survived another day." "Always nice to defy the odds," Lyra said, her relief palpable. Grigori laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. And we've got a story to tell that even I might find hard to believe. Quillen nodded, feeling the weight of the journey lift from his shoulders. Now, let's get back to the ship. We've got a mechanist to outsmart and a universe to disappoint. As they made their way back to the Aurora, the stars shining down like silent witnesses, Quillen couldn't help but think, maybe, just maybe, they still had a chance. And for now, that was enough. But in the unyielding expanse of space, hope was a fragile thing. Easily crushed, but oh, how it burned, bright and defiant, as they set their course for the next chapter in their never-ending story. As the crew of the Aurora trudged back to their beleaguered ship, the path before them lit by the fading glow of the artifacts map, Captain Quillen couldn't help but feel that the universe was setting them up for another cosmic punchline. It was like being part of the galaxy's longest-running farce, with no end in sight and dangerously low ratings. "Hey, Quillen," Lyra called from behind, where she was busy poking at her wrist console like it owed her money. "You ever feel like we're just characters in some giant space opera?" "And not even the main ones, just the comic relief," Quillen smirked, a weary sort of grin that seemed permanently etched into his features. "If we are, someone's really got it out for us. Probably jealous of our good looks and charming personalities. Must be your dashing wit," Grigori chimed in, his voice a mix of mischief and oblivion. "Or my unyielding optimism." "Yeah, optimism," Lyra snorted, stepping over a protruding root with all the grace of a drunk dancer. "That's exactly what's going to save us from the Mechanist." The Mechanist. The name hung over them like a storm cloud, promising doom and inconvenience in equal measure. A self-proclaimed genius with more metal in his body than sense in his head. And there they were, armed with a dying glow stick and some ancient bedtime stories. But somewhere along the way, inspiration had struck. Or maybe it was desperation masquerading as inspiration. Either way, they had a plan. Sort of. "So, about this storytelling idea," Quillen said, keeping his voice low as they approached the Aurora. "Think we can really use it against the Mechanist?" Grigori's eyes lit up, the kind of enthusiasm one normally reserved for puppies and fresh coffee. "Stories have power, Cap. Always have. People believe what they hear, especially if it's dramatic and a bit ridiculous. Sounds like our lives," Lyra muttered, her fingers weaving through her hair in a futile attempt to smooth out the tangles. "What if the Mechanist's control over his followers isn't just about tech?" Grigori continued, warming to his theme. "What if he spun some grand tale they are all invested in?" Quillen considered this, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "You mean, like how we're all invested in the idea of getting paid for this job exactly?" Grigori nodded. "If we can disrupt his narrative, give them a new story to believe in, something more compelling than serve me or be assimilated." Lyra cut in, raising an eyebrow. Grigori shrugged. "Couldn't hurt to try. We give them a story with a better ending, something they can't resist." Quillen glanced at the artifact, now tucked safely in his pack, its light dim but its potential vast. "And we use this thing to amplify it. Make it more than just words." He had to admit, it was a wild idea. But then, wild ideas were what had kept them alive this long. That, and a stubborn refusal to die in a way that would make for a good laugh at their expense. The Aurora loomed ahead, its once sleek lines marred by battle scars and the odd scorch mark, souvenirs from 1,000 misadventures. They clambered aboard, the familiar hum of the ship's systems a kind of warped lullaby. "All right, team," Quillen said as they gathered in the cramped confines of the bridge. "Let's brainstorm. What kind of story do we want to tell?" Lyra leaned back in her chair, arms crossed and eyes gleaming with mischief. "How about the one where the Mechanist gets caught in a malfunctioning airlock?" "It's a classic," Quillen chuckled, shaking his head. "Tempting, but we need something a bit more captivating." "I've got it," Grigori exclaimed, perched on the edge of his seat like an eager student. "We spin a yarn about a group of rebels, gritty, resilient, a little bit ragtag, who defy the odds and bring down a tyrant, so us." Lyra said with a sardonic twist of her lips. "Exactly." Grigori grinned undeterred. We play to the audience. People love an underdog story. Quillen nodded slowly, the cogs of his mind turning with renewed vigor. And we make sure it's got all the bells and whistles. A tale of redemption, sacrifice, and the triumph of the human spirit. Sounds like every Holovid ever made, Lyra drawled, but there was a spark of interest in her eyes. But I suppose if we can't beat them with logic, we can try entertainment. Hey, if it worked for the ancient Earth politicians, maybe it'll work for us, Quillen said, a grin tugging at his lips. Let's get to work. They spent the next few hours cobbling together their opus, a hodgepodge of cliches and high drama that somehow felt just right. Grigori provided the raw enthusiasm, Lyra the biting commentary, and Quillen the narrative glue to hold it all together. As they worked, the ship's comms crackled to life, a distorted voice cutting through the static. Captain Quillen, this is the Mechanist. You've been rather elusive, but your theatrics end now. Surrender the artifact or face the consequences. Ah, the Mechanist himself, Lyra said, mockingly bowing to the ceiling. How nice of him to drop by. Quillen rolled his eyes, flipping a switch to respond. Greetings, O metallic mastermind. We're a bit busy right now, but if you'd like to leave a message, we'll get back to you once we've finished saving the galaxy. The comms sputtered, the Mechanist's voice tinged with annoyance. Your insolence is noted, Captain. You will find that my patience is not infinite. Quillen flicked the comms off with a satisfying click. All right, that'll buy us a little time before he sends his goons. Let's hope our little storytime session works, Lyra said, casting a glance at the artifact now glowing softly on the console. Or we'll be the ones getting written out. With their tail polished to a somewhat passable shine, they set about recording it, using the artifact's energy to broadcast the tale on every frequency they could hijack. It was a race against the clock, but then, when wasn't it? The story unfolded like some celestial radio drama, each word imbued with the artifact's resonance, seeping into the minds of anyone listening. It was a gamble, but in a galaxy where the dice were always loaded, they'd learned to play with whatever chips they could scrounge. As their narrative reached its crescendo, Quillen felt a shift, not just in the ship but in the very air around them. A subtle, almost imperceptible change, like the pause before a storm breaks. And so he intoned, voice steady despite the chaos around him. The oppressed rose, not with weapons of steel, but with the strength of their conviction and the power of a collective story. A tale that outshone the darkest tyranny with the light of hope. The transmission cut out, leaving only the silence of the void and the hum of the Aurora's engines. They waited, breaths held, for some sign that their gambit had paid off. Well, Lyra said finally, breaking the tension with a dry chuckle. If nothing else, we've given them something to think about. Quillen exhaled, feeling the tightness in his chest ease just a fraction. Now we wait and see if the Mechanist's followers are more loyal to him or to the myth they bought into. Grigori leaned back, a satisfied smile on his face. I'd like to think we gave them a new narrative. One where they don't need a tin-plated dictator to lead them. Let's just hope they don't decide the villain's the one they want to root for, Lyra added, ever the cynic but with a glimmer of hope in her tone. You know how these things go. Sometimes the bad guy has all the best lines. Quillen sat back, letting the enormity of their actions settle over him. They'd taken a shot in the dark, and all they could do now was wait to see where it landed. In a universe that thrived on uncertainty, it was the most certainty they could afford. A soft beep from the console drew his attention, a message pinging through the static. It was a simple image, a symbol really, one that had appeared in the artifact's data. The sign of a new dawn breaking. Looks like we might have hit a nerve, Quillen said, a grin spreading across his face. Lyra peered over his shoulder, eyebrows raised. What's it mean? Could be the start of something, Quillen replied, hope mingling with caution. Or just another plot twist in our cosmic soap opera. Grigori clapped his hands together, the sound echoing through the bridge with a cheerful finality. Either way, we've bought ourselves some time. Quillen nodded, feeling the weight of the past few days lifting ever so slightly. They weren't out of the woods yet, far from it. But they'd taken a step, and sometimes a single step was all it took to change the course of history. "Let's prepare for whatever comes next," he said, his voice steady and full of resolve. "We've got a mechanist to outwit and a galaxy that's not going to save itself." As they set about readying the Aurora for the next leg of their journey, Quillen couldn't help but wonder what the next chapter held. For now, they'd made it through the day, and in the grand tapestry of the universe, that was more than enough. The stars awaited, their light a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the cosmos, there was always a story waiting to be told. Captain Quillen sat in the captain's chair like a man who'd just been told the punchline to a really bad joke. In a way, that was his entire life. He glanced sideways at Lyra, who was busy poking her wrist console like it owed her money. Grigori was humming some ancient Earth pop tune badly. "Right," Quillen said, drawing out the word like a blade from a sheath. "We've got mechanists' followers drinking the Kool-Aid, and now it's time to spike it with a little truth serum." Lyra snorted, casting a sideways glance at Grigori. "And here I thought we were just gonna buy them a nice bottle of reality." "Well, our store is out there," Grigori said, trying to hide the nervous energy bubbling just beneath his grin. "We just need to nudge it along a bit. Get the fan fiction rolling." Quillen nodded. "It's a roll of the dice whether they'll bite, but if they do, the mechanist might find himself short a few metalheads." The mechanist. The self-proclaimed genius who probably thought empathy was a programming error. More metal than flesh, more arrogance than brains. The kind of antagonist that made you question the universe's quality control. "So, what's the plan?" Lyra asked, fingers still dancing across her console. She looked up, eyes sharp, ready for whatever half-baked scheme Quillen had cooked up. Quillen tapped the side of his head. "We use the artifact to amplify the signal, get it into every crevice of their circuits, make our story the loudest one in the room. And when they realize they've been sold a bridge on Mars," Grigori asked. "We point and laugh," Lyra suggested with a wicked grin. "And then we offer them a new lease on life. One without a dictator. If they don't see the light," Quillen added, "we'll make sure they see the spark." The Aurora was as ready as she'd ever be, battle scars and all. The ship was like a bar brawler who'd been in one too many scraps but still had a mean right hook. Quillen felt a kinship with the old girl. Both of them had been through hell and were just stubborn enough to keep going. "All right, let's get this show on the road," he said, leaning forward as if he could will the ship to move with just his thoughts. "Grigori, get that artifact singing. Lyra, make sure our comms are ready to interrupt their regularly scheduled programming." "On it, Cap," Grigori replied, his fingers a blur over the console. The artifact began to glow, its light pulsing in time with the tale they'd spun. A story of rebellion, of unity, of tossing out the tin tyrant in favor of a future where they wrote their own destinies. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she worked. "Comms are set. Ready to beam our bedtime story to every channel those bolts forebrains can pick up." The mechanist's followers, convinced they'd found their messiah in a mechanized madman, were about to get a narrative twist they hadn't seen coming. Quillen imagined the look on the mechanist's face when he found out his followers were more invested in a plotline than his plan for universe domination. "Let's do this," Quillen said, his voice low, charged with the kind of determination that was only half powered by caffeine and the other half by sheer bloody-mindedness. "Grigori, light it up." The artifact shone, its glow spilling out, casting weird shadows that danced across the bridge walls like a ghostly audience waiting for the curtain to rise. The story was theirs now, amplified and riding the frequencies to reach every corner of the mechanist's empire. "Showtime," Lyra said, a wicked grin playing on her lips. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that usually preceded either a brilliant victory or a spectacular failure. But they'd lived through both and had learned that the line between the two was often as thin as the skin on a space peanut. As the artifact's signal spread, Grigori clapped his hands together, a sound that cut through the tension. If this doesn't work, we could always start a career in entertainment. Quillen and crew, space bards extraordinaire. Quillen chuckled, the sound of gravelly rumble deep in his chest. I'll pass on the tights and loot, thanks. Lyra's eyes were glued to her console, watching for any signs that their transmission was hitting home. We're getting responses, she said, voice edged with something that might have been hope. Looks like the story's spreading like a bad case of moon flu. Now we just have to see if they're buying what we're selling, Quillen said, arms crossed as if he could squeeze out the pressure that threatened to crush his ribs. The mechanist had built his power on technology and fear, but Quillen was betting there was still a spark of humanity left in those followers. And if there was one thing humanity loved, it was a good story. Signals flashed across the console, indicators of incoming messages. The mechanist's followers were talking, questioning, maybe even doubting. It was a start. Lyra leaned back in her chair, the tension easing from her shoulders. Looks like they're waking up. The chatter's picking up, and not in a let's shoot them kind of way. How's the mechanist taking it? Grigori asked, his voice tinged with mischief. About as well as a cat in a bathtub, Lyra replied, scanning the data streaming in. He's trying to regain control, but it looks like the narrative's slipping through his fingers. Good, Quillen said, his gaze fixed on the console. Let him writhe for a bit. Maybe he'll learn that controlling people doesn't work when they find a better story. As if summoned by their thoughts, the mechanist's voice crackled through the Aurora's speakers, laced with a desperation that hadn't been there before. Quillen, you think this changes anything? My followers will see through your lies. Quillen smirked, a wolfish grin that felt all too natural. Oh, I'm not worried about that. In fact, I'm counting on them seeing through yours. Silence followed, the kind of silence that marked a stalemate in the dance of war. The mechanist was a man who had never entertained the possibility of failure, and now he was faced with the crumbling edifice of his own making. I have something for you, mechanist, Quillen continued, his voice carrying the weight of every setback, every narrow escape, and every moment of triumph they'd clawed back from the jaws of defeat. A gift, if you will. The truth, the mechanist's scoff echoed through the comms like a metallic sneer. Truth is subjective, Captain. Not this time, Quillen replied, his voice a calm sea against the mechanist's storm. We've given your people a choice. Let's see if they prefer your tyranny or their freedom. Grigori's grin was infectious, spreading to Lyra and igniting a spark in Quillen's chest that felt dangerously like hope. Looks like your empire's got a few holes in the hull, mechanist. The mechanist's response was a burst of static, followed by the sound of someone who'd just been sucker-punched by reality. You've made a mistake, Captain. You think you've won, but you're just delaying the inevitable. Funny, Quillen said, leaning back with all the arrogance of a gambler holding a royal flush. I was about to say the same thing to you. The transmission cut out, leaving only the hum of the ship and the growing buzz of incoming messages, each one a testament to the fact that the seeds of doubt had taken root. Lyra let out a slow breath, one that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken doubts. They're buying it, Quillen. I think we've actually done it. Quillen nodded, the enormity of their gamble finally settling in the pit of his stomach. We've given them a story they can believe in, one where they are the heroes. Grigori clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him out of his chair. Never thought I'd see the day when we turned storytelling into a weapon. We've always known it was, Lyra said, her voice softer, touched with the barest hint of reverence. It's how humans have always fought against the darkness. Quillen looked around at his crew, his family, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something other than weary cynicism. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close enough. So, what now? Lyra asked, her voice cutting through the moment like a knife. Now, Quillen said, standing and feeling the weight of leadership settle comfortably on his shoulders, we prepare for what comes next. The mechanist's not gone yet, and we've got a galaxy that's still far from saved. But we've got a chance, Grigori interjected, his grin wide enough to light up the gloom. Quillen nodded. Yeah, we've got a chance. And for now, that's more than we had yesterday. As they began the work of planning their next move, Quillen allowed himself a moment to look out at the stars. Each point of light was a reminder that no matter how vast the darkness, there was always a story waiting to be told. And maybe, just maybe, they were writing a better one. The aurora drifted through the void, a scarred relic of countless battles, yet still holding together like duct tape on an old space heater. Inside, its crew was enjoying a rare moment of what could be optimistically termed as peace, though with this crew, it was more like the eye of a particularly sarcastic storm. Captain Quillen sat in his chair, his posture somewhere between relaxed and ready to leap up and throttle the universe for its latest affront. He looked at Lyra with the kind of pride that was usually reserved for watching someone else's kid at a school recital. Well, I guess we're not dead yet. How's that for a surprise ending? Lyra smirked, her fingers idly tapping her wrist console. I can't believe it either. You'd think the universe would have caught on by now and thrown something at us. Give it time, Quillen replied dryly. I'm sure there's a cosmic anvil out there with our name on it. Grigori was humming an ancient Earth tune, something bubbly and incongruously cheerful given their predicament. He leaned back, eyes closed, his fingers drumming on the console in front of him. So we've defeated a megalomaniac with nothing but a good yarn. Who knew? Maybe we should have tried knitting him a sweater instead. Didn't have the right needles, Lyra shot back. Besides, we were low on yarn. Used it all up on that last mission to Zeta 9. Quillen chuckled, a deep rumble that seemed to fit him as naturally as his well-worn jacket. Well, I suppose it's time to head back. We've got an artifact to deliver, a paycheck to collect, and maybe even a bit of shore leave if the universe is feeling generous. Shore leave. Lyra raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of skepticism and hope. You mean where we end up in a rundown bar and get into a fight because Grigori can't keep his mouth shut? Hey, Grigori protested, opening one eye. I'm not the one who insulted that Borkian's mother. Lyra shrugged, unapologetic. She had it coming. Besides, it wasn't an insult, it was a compliment in some cultures. Sure, if those cultures were populated by people who enjoyed being compared to defunct kitchen appliances, Grigori retorted, his grin wide. Quillen shook his head, a half-smile ghosting across his lips. All right, settle down. Let's get this old girl pointed towards home before someone decides to test the limits of freedom of speech in a vacuum. As Grigori adjusted their course, the ship hummed with the quiet, industrious noise of a job well done. The artifact sat secure in its containment field, a silent testament to their victory over the Mechanist. Assuming it didn't explode or attract every pirate within 3 star systems, they might even make it back in one piece. Captain, you're getting sentimental, Lyra teased, watching him with knowing eyes. Quillen huffed, leaning back in his chair. Sentimentalities for people who don't have a hypersonic railgun pointed at their heads half the time. I'm just enjoying a moment of not being shot at. How long you think that'll last? Grigori asked, ever the realist. Long enough to patch the holes and get a drink, Quillen replied, eyes fixed on the stars. After that, who knows? They sat in companionable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The Mechanist's downfall had been a gamble with odds so long they'd make a bookie sweat, but they'd managed to pull it off. And all it had taken was a story. Funny, Quillen thought. The universe's most advanced technology brought low by a bedtime tale. He'd remember that the next time someone tried to sell him on the latest piece of overpriced tech with more buttons than sense. Lyra broke the silence, her voice thoughtful. So, anyone care to speculate what happens when we hand this thing over? Think they'll pay up? Grigori snorted. As long as we get paid before they realize it's all smoke and mirrors, I'm happy. Pretty sure that's what they said before the last economic crash, Lyra noted with a sardonic grin. Hey, we're not responsible for what happens after we cash the check, Quillen said, trying for light-hearted and landing somewhere near pragmatic cynicism. That's the spirit, Grigori laughed. We're not conmen, we're opportunists. Quillen felt a warmth in his chest, a strange sense of camaraderie that he would deny vehemently if asked. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his ragtag bunch, and together they'd managed to pull off the impossible. All right, let's get this heap back to Earth, Quillen said, pushing himself to his feet with a groan that sounded like it came from both him and the ship. Grigori, keep us on course. Lyra, make sure our comms are clean. I'd rather not have any surprises before payday. Aye, Captain, Lyra replied with a mock salute already focused on her console. Grigori nodded, eyes twinkling with mischief. And if we do get surprises, hopefully they come with better entertainment than our last guests. As the Aurora sailed through the void, Quillen felt a strange sense of peace. They'd told a story, and it had worked. Maybe there was something to this human thing after all. Stories had power, and they'd wielded it like a weapon. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he considered the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, they weren't as doomed as he usually liked to believe. But then again, Quillen thought with a wry smile, never underestimate the universe's ability to turn a good moment into a disaster. They'd have to be ready for whatever came next, but for now, there was the promise of a paycheck, the pull of gravity, and the alluring thought of a drink that wasn't synthetically derived. The stars stretched out before them, a tapestry of light that promised adventure and doom in equal measure. For a crew like theirs, that was more than enough to keep them going. To stories, Lyra said, raising an imaginary glass as if toasting the cosmos itself. To stories, Quillen echoed, allowing himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were writing one worth telling. As the ship and crew sailed towards whatever awaited them on the other side of the stars, Quillen couldn't help but feel a twinge of hope. Not the kind that promised anything more than the next sunrise, but a hope that spoke of survival, of resilience, and of the sheer bloody-mindedness that seemed to define humanity. All right, he said, settling back into his chair with a contented sigh. Let's go see what sort of trouble we can get into next. And with that, the Aurora continued on its way, a ship full of misfits and dreamers, ready to take on whatever the universe had the nerve to throw at them next.